Autumn officially arrives this evening around 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And 4 times a year as the seasons change, we like to welcome back our resident astronomer, Dr. Chris Palma from the Penn State Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. He's also Associate Dean for undergraduate students in the Eberly College of Science. Good to see you again, Chris.
Thank you.
So for me, one of the most newsworthy recent events in your field was the delay in the launch of the Artemis spacecraft, scrubbed twice, now rescheduled for later this month. Bring us up to date on Artemis.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it launches on September 27th, so coming up here very soon. This is a really powerful rocket designed to return us to the moon. So I'm really excited because the plan is to take the crew vehicle out beyond the moon, close to the surface, and then to orbit the moon for several weeks before returning to Earth. So this is a test flight, which will prove that we can do this safely and bring astronauts back to the moon relatively soon.
And if I understand, this is unmanned, though. This
Yes.
first test flight is unmanned.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me, sort of changing subjects, with cameras being ubiquitous these days, you got webcams, dash cams, for example, more and more meteors are being captured on video, and I guess a really vivid one was sighted last week over Scotland. Was that part of a bigger meteor shower, or was it sort of a one-off?
Yeah. Well, this was really interesting. So I think it was a one-off. I don't think it was related to any meteor showers. But the interesting thing is it's getting harder to tell whether these are natural rocks or whether they're satellites re-entering. There are thousands of new satellites, and so this could be an artificial meteor. But everything we can tell so far seems to be that this was a rock that broke up, and there may have been meteorites that fell on one of the outlying islands just off the coast of Scotland.
I hadn't thought about that. So increasingly, these could be man-made, coming back to Earth. Let's talk about some of the interesting research being done in your department. First, involving the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Some graduate students, I understand, working on a unique experiment that actually involves using our own sun as a detection tool.
Yeah. So this is a little complicated in the sense that what they were using was an idea called gravitational lensing, which we've talked about a few times. So this was proposed by Einstein, and we know it works this way. What happens is that light from distant objects gets amplified when it passes by a very massive object. So these graduate students said intelligent civilizations could use this as a trick to communicate. If you send a signal close to a star, it will bend and get amplified. So they checked. It was a very small survey. They didn't detect anything, but it was really a proof of concept that this could be done. And so I think we're going to see more and more people continue this type of search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yeah, so I guess if we assume there's intelligent life out there, they're smart enough to know that that the laws of physics work that way.
Yes.
That's neat. Also, the new James Webb Space Telescope is all the rage these days, but Hubble still operating. Still making discoveries, including one that has something to do with a black hole.
And this is interesting because it's the exact same physics as we were just talking about, but instead of a civilization using a star to amplify a signal, when a black hole passes in front of a distant star, it can warp the light of that star and let us see it. And so what was really unique about Hubble's study was that Hubble was able to really, really precisely measure the deflection of the starlight, proving that this object was a single black hole moving through the Milky Way galaxy.
An isolated black hole, which we can't see, but we can use other techniques to indirectly detect its presence.
Exactly.
Back in our solar system, I did see some stunning close-up pictures of the surface of Mercury, taken from a probe launched not by NASA but by the European Space Agency. What are some of the interesting questions that still need to be answered about Mercury?
Yeah. Well, let me start by just saying I find it really interesting that the Europeans and the Japanese are sending these satellites because these are the first ever non-NASA missions to visit Mercury. I'll give you my perspective on the interesting questions, so it might not be exactly the same, but everything we can learn about the planets in our own solar system helps us understand all the different ways planets can form and helps us understand when we see a really, really distant object, is it a rocky planet like Mercury, is it a water planet like Earth, or is it a gas planet like Jupiter? And so the more we can really learn the details of Mercury, the better we can understand these more distant, harder to study worlds.
So you said this is the first time a probe not sent by NASA has investigated Mercury.
Yes.
And it's a joint between the Europeans and the Japanese.
Yes.
All right, so to close, any tips for those who like to look at the night sky, especially this time of year?
Yeah. So I got a request from a friend of the show to talk more about constellations.
Okay.
So I want to talk about Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter is really bright in the night sky right now, and so is Saturn. But the Great Square of Pegasus is going to be just higher in the sky. So look for bright Jupiter, and then look just above it to see the square of the constellation Pegasus. And then if you can find Saturn a little bit lower to the southwest, you can also look for the bright constellation Aquila, the Eagle, and the bright star Altair will be just higher in the sky than the planet Saturn.
This is in the evening sky.
Yes.
So folks don't have to get up at 4 in the morning. But
10 p.m. is perfect to see Jupiter and Saturn.
Those 4 in the morning sightings are a little tough for me. Dr. Chris Palma, our resident astronomer from the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. Thanks for stopping by, Chris.
Sure. Thank you.
And we will be back in a moment with more.